everyone. Thank you for tuning in for yet another episode of GreyhoundTV ONTrigger. First of all, thank you for making our last episode with Roberto of Desart Group a huge success. The last time I checked, we were about at 150,000 views from over 100 plus countries. So thank you for making time once again. And those of you who haven't watched it, trust me, you're truly missing out. So I urge you to go back to the channel and have a look at that video as well. But this time we have a very interesting guest with us. He's somebody who's been involved in the SaaS world since the year 2000. Now that's virtually the year SaaS really got started. But he's too young, sorry, to be called as the grandfather of SaaS. So I call him the father of SaaS since he just told me he's a dad of 3 children as well. So safe enough to call him the father of SaaS. And then he spent about 14 odd years at Boston Consulting Group. There again, too, he was leading SaaS and software and big data and AI. And now he's filling in really big shoes at IBM, where he leads corporate strategy and ventures. Roger, thank you for making time for GreyhoundTV ONTrigger.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it.
Well, okay, thank you. So even before we talk about anything else, let's address a big theme. Over the last about 2 to 3 years, we've heard about this new IBM, quote unquote, right? And as somebody who's been tracking IBM for 20 odd years now, I truly feel there's a sense of new IBM. And the fact that someone like you who's not from IBM and from outside is, at a leadership role hasn't happened before, really, right? So tell me what's been your experience so far. Are there things where you sort of sit back and say, wow, I didn't really expect that. This is wonderful. And are there things where you go and say, oh, I wish we could do it quicker?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'd say, so I just passed my 3-year mark at IBM, which went incredibly fast. I will say I cheated slightly. When IBM was my main client when I was at BCG. So I worked on a lot of what is today's strategy from that side. And about 3 years ago, I got a call from Arvind right before I became CEO to come to this side and really put my money where my mouth was behind the strategy thinking. But you're right, there has been a massive change in IBM, and we see it in our performance, going from a shrinking company to a growing company, much more focused. We are the top performing tech stock in the S&P 500 last year. That hadn't been said for decades.
That's true.
So it is a big change. And then what underpins it, I'm sure we'll get into it much more deeply, is the hybrid cloud and AI strategy, which is just this reality that companies around the world, but maybe if you dial back, if you said 2015, I think a lot of folks, myself included, thought we were on an inextricable march to everything landing on a public cloud utility.
That's true.
And what we found is that hybrid multi-cloud is here to stay, with data centers still having a role with many companies, with multiple clouds being adopted for a lot of specific function, acquired a company, I want a specific service, it's only available for one vendor, and then edge workloads coming online in so many different industries as well. Heterogeneity is here to stay, and I'm sure we'll dig deeper on it, but the thing that kind of the open source community has given us, which is kind of miraculous, is this open source layer, really containers and Kubernetes and the projects that surround it, that we've built our strategy around, which is really this notion that you can take that open source layer and use it as your innovation layer across all that heterogeneity. So that heterogeneity is not a tax on the rate and pace of innovation, nor is a multiplier effect on all the operations, security, compliance that you have to do. So, solving that huge industry problem with open source is kind of at the core of what has really shaped IBM. And along the way, a lot of the work that, has been part of the difficult part has been also shedding some of the businesses that weren't part of that strategy, because there's a lot of things that we'd stood through for years. But now you look at IBM today and you say the whole company contributes to that strategy.
That is true. That is very well said. In fact, I remember the times when IBM came up with these full-page ads for public cloud. They were ads which were sort of comparing IBM public cloud to AWS, and I kept wondering, why would IBM do that? Because that's not IBM's sweet spot. It was always the enterprise and the hybrid architecture, and wonderful, where sort of these strategies come to, and glad you've been contributing. But even before we move into hybrid cloud and AI and more, I really want to sort of ask you a personal question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
What truly inspires Roger? What sort of keeps you on? Because as a consultant, life is difficult. You have so much to consume, and then so much to sort of strategize and advise. And now, of course, where you are, it's a very important role. So, what makes you kicked about let's say going to work every morning, or let's say pushing the envelope each day when you sort of wake up?
Yeah, I'd say two things. I mean, I'll make it in general about my job and then specifically on IBM. First of all, as a kind of now, like you said, I was a software guy 20 years ago. I've kind of become a career strategy consultant now. I think I'm going to come up on 20 years of that soon. So I guess I have to say I'm a strategy guy now. But what I really love about that role is so much of that is understanding markets, market need, and then in the space I work in, to the technology industry, technical possibility. And I think that intersection of when you find market need and a way to address it with technology, and when it really clicks, and then what is the business that brings that to life? To me, I thrive on that, and it is sometimes like a needle in a haystack hunt where you don't even know if there's a needle in there. So you're really takes a lot of persistence to really dig into it. But when you find those are the kind of the moments that are really kind of exciting and gratifying in this job. And they happen at the overall company level. They may happen at a product line. They may happen in a route to market conversation. But bringing that to life really excites me and kind of motivates me. I can count the moments when you said like the aha of so many of those throughout my career. And then for IBM, it's a similar thought, but it's just this notion that, I think for me personally, I'd always had kind of a romance around IBM long before I worked there, of this company that had really been, shaping technology, shaping industries for decades.
Right.
And I think back to, the hybrid cloud strategy, and we'll dig in deeper there. We really have the opportunity to bring IBM into a leadership position, because I do believe that, hybrid cloud platform to span that heterogeneity is where companies should innovate. And it's got this deep truth that we can bring to our end clients. And so if we can bring that to our clients, help them innovate, and bring IBM back to kind of where it has been in history. I mean, so many great stories have been written about the IBM leadership teams that have brought IBM back to the pinnacle in each generation.
That's true.
It's a personal thrill to hopefully be doing that, but recognizing that each generation, it is not promised at all for IBM. We're up against fierce competition, and so we have to go out and earn it. So being part of that is, and I think about all of our customers, all of our employees, all the people who have stuck with us, partners through the years, like rewarding all those constituencies that have believed in IBM. It really does motivate me kind of on a daily basis.
It's a wonderful answer. As they say, it takes about 20 years for an overnight success, right? So IBM is a classic story.
Absolutely.
It's taken so many, and what's fascinating for me as an analyst on the outside is that for 10 odd years we saw IBM continuously losing money, but it didn't stop investing into quantum, for example. It didn't stop investing into platforms. It didn't stop investing into so many of these long-ranging bets, which never really had any financials attached to it on the outcome in next quarter. And I think that's fascinating, because that's probably IBM is the only listed company that's managed to sort of evolve while being public, because Dell went private as well. So I think kudos to IBM for sort of staying relevant in today's world. But you spent a lot of time at BCG as well. You had an entire roster of clients. Even before we sort of double click on hybrid and AI and IBM specifically, I'd love to understand from you, as somebody who's sort of been helping large vendors really redefine their strategy. What were those moments in the last 2 decades where you thought that this change is going to bring about a massive change in the industry?
Well, I do. I mean, along that journey, certainly the early days of cloud, the early days of AI happened with a number of my clients. I'd say, I mean, the ones I can talk about are the IBM experiences. And I'll just say, I do remember it was maybe 2016, 17, when I always have, Peter Thiel coined this phrase, but I always believe that if you want to see the future, look around you. And so with that hybrid cloud heterogeneity, I remember the first CIO I talked to that was using Kubernetes as a way to normalize across different cloud environments. And they were rolling their own off the upstream open source. But just the fact that somebody had made that deliberate choice. I need to be across multiple clouds. They didn't have a data center. They had multiple clouds, and they were maintaining their own distribution of Kubernetes to give a common development and operations environment to their team. And that moment, because we've kind of been hypothesizing, like, we deeply believed hybrid was here to stay, but it wasn't clear that there was a platform that would work for it. Just hearing that articulation, that's probably 2016. And we probably did 4 or 5 follow-up conversations with that CIO to really interrogate that. Then we started, if you dug more, you found a few more that had that thought process happening if you really dug into the Kubernetes community. So that was kind of a moment you say, aha, there's an intractable problem coming and there's a solution. Because I think the other path at the time was, hey, listen, we're just going to have to accept this complexity tax. We'll have some things living in cloud 1, cloud 2, cloud 3.
Right.
And CIOs, CTOs are just going to have to live with that. And that's how the next couple decades will go. And to your point, just to pick on the one thing you said, I think the other thing that comes up a lot is, we are still on the front end of real adoption of these technologies. Like, we've been working with, market forecasts, et cetera. I mean, we really do think that the real adoption of open source technologies in the enterprise at scale are really still coming. So when you say, overnight successes take a couple decades, I mean, sincerely believe that. Kubernetes is going to turn 10 next year, and it's really just getting started. And so different the dynamics in the I think so many people have a consumer space thing where there's kind of a flavor of the month. The enterprise can't change platforms next week.
That's so true.
Are very high.
It's so funny you say that. Just the other day, I was on a call with a journalist who said, so much happening with ChatGPT. I said, look, you probably haven't seen what folks like IBM have been doing on NLP and AI for about probably 10 years now. And, ChatGPT is the world of Twitter. It's a very different world, not necessarily is going to land in the enterprise. And you're absolutely right. Let's talk about IBM Hybrid Cloud. It's a topic that sort of excites me because I'll tell you why. I find the strategy very comprehensive and very well laid out. And also what I've seen is a big change in how IBM is sort of going to market, especially with onboarding that ecosystem. I remember seeing the chart of yours. It's a beautiful strategy chart, and literally half of that chart is ecosystem, really. Now, for a company like IBM, which was always sort of you incentivized your sales guys to go and sell IBM Cloud in each deal, probably, to sort of go from that approach and go to an ecosystem in approach is quite the change, right? So talk to me about how have you morphed the strategy and the company and the people alongside to be able to sort of accommodate that ecosystem part in a very big way at deal to deal level, quite frankly.
Thanks for noticing that. I mean, it's very intentional and very deliberate. And if people want to check out the chart, I mean, it's in every one of our earnings reports, this kind of stack diagram of the IBM company. And to your point, like on that chart, I guess it's virtual ink, but the ink on the page is half for the ecosystem. And that is a very different IBM. But I'd say 2 things. One, we're very intentional about that Red Hat layer being the common platform on which we innovate or we deliver on top of our infrastructure, or we implement as skills within our consulting team. We sincerely believe for our own IT and for the clients that lead with us, that is the right architecture to deliver upon. And if you're going to have an open source layer, we're taking on big things. It's the digital transformation of the enterprise, the AI transformation of the enterprise. The notion, maybe an IBM from the 1960s kind of could have been the full stack vendor because technology was so much smaller in industry.
That's true.
Depending on what you look at, technology is like a $2 trillion industry.
That's true.
We can't possibly try to control all that. And we just realized there's so much more value in a strategy where we believe that we know that platform creates value for our clients. It's about growing the pie with partners rather than thinking about how we slice it. And we've just demonstrated that. I'm sure we'll dig into it more deeply, but you talked about IBM Cloud, and it was a big choice for us to start partnering with. We still have the IBM Cloud and has real differentiation in financial services and specific kind of regulated cloud industries in particular. But so many times when you're talking about hybrid cloud, the client is talking about AWS as the cloud or Azure as the cloud. So I've been very close to the AWS relationship as the executive leading that. And I've just seen personally how it collaborating on those big client transformations is growing our business and growing AWS's. So we just see growing the pie, and then we can quibble over how to slice a particular thing, but if we're growing the pie that much, the partnership just keeps growing and expanding and accelerating both of our businesses.
Yeah, it makes sense. Even, I mean, a simple back of the envelope calculation tells you the addressable market pretty much doubles or triples. I mean, if you leave that out, it just, I mean, I wonder why it didn't happen earlier, but that's another time. But, there is a huge amount of confusion.
Hey, Sachin, I can give a simple answer to that.
Please.
We didn't, in the world pre-Red Hat, we didn't have an answer. We didn't have an answer for that. We made choices to say, now, if you think about our software portfolio, our SaaS portfolio, we've made that multi-cloud.
That's true.
So, if you said in a world where, hey, all of my technology runs on a singular stack and I partner in a way that takes that stack off the table for the client, there wasn't something. We've made our business so much more flexible by adopting the hybrid cloud strategy in our portfolio itself. So pretty simple answer why it didn't happen before. We didn't have a hybrid multi-cloud business. Now we have that. We can run our SaaS on top of different clouds because we're adopting the standard itself as well.
It's fascinating, the fact that you can buy IBM software on a marketplace, unthinkable 10 years ago from coming from IBM, right? So, we'll talk about that too. But, I really want to sort of pick your brains on a topic which sort of concerns my customers the most. When I sort of speak to them, let's say about Red Hat or any sort of platform of that nature, they're very divided in their opinions. While, I would say 50% are okay with independent hybrid platforms, another 50% are towards hyperscaler paths. There's a ton of confusion as to what's the right choice, what's more futuristic, what really future-proofs my business, so to say, right? Because there's always this technology urge to overspend on tech and over-engineer tech, right? So that sort of complicates the choices ultimately they make on the hybrid tech platform as well. So what's your opinion on that? And how do you sort of enable your teams to simplify that for your customers?
Yeah. Well, I'd start with one point, which is architectural purity. It never happens, right? So I think to some extent, we always have to acknowledge that there'll be special cases that are different than the target architecture. But then I get to what is our starting point? So if I was with the president of a large US bank, and they were doing a lot of their innovation on Azure. They'd acquired some technologies that were on AWS. They had GCP. They had a number of these clouds. They had a data center. They had an IBM mainframe. Actually a very common starting point. And then you say, and a lot of those teams inside the client, I'm not, any one of those clouds, there's a team whose title is that cloud teams. They are the Azure team inside that bank. They are the AWS team inside that bank. So it almost reinforces this notion that this is what I do. It's my job description. But when you get to the conversation of, well, are you going to be across these multiple clouds for the foreseeable future? The answer is yes. It's too painful to move. There's a lot of good kind of data location reasons that they're across those different things. Then he started going through the security compliance bills they're paying. And they're paying that security compliance bill times 3 to do the same work in each of those environments.
That's true.
And so, because they're based on, we do think the opinionated stack that Red Hat has, the leadership they've had in open source for a couple of decades, the way they do DevOps for the enterprise, we do think that is differentiated, but you can debate that. But the thing you can't debate is, if you adopt that standard, I can go from 3 security audits to 1.
That's true.
And so
That's true.
The president started looking at both those direct cost avoidance, but also the complexity tax he was paying to, even though there's similar stacks, to port applications, to have development teams that could work across those environments. He was paying this innovation tax because he had those kind of organizational silos dedicated to those environments. So once you kind of get to that, the choice becomes pretty obvious, but it comes from, are you in that starting point? There are other clients that are on a data center to a single cloud journey. I think Red Hat, to the point that we could debate before, does have, I think, is much more intentional and thoughtful about what open source projects integrate around OpenShift. But if you're on that journey, maybe it's not as strong an argument. If you're across multiple clouds, multiple environments, the economic benefit to the
Yeah,
company
it's true.
is just enormous. So you can have a debate. I like this flavor of tool or that. But if you look at, in some of these banks, it is like denominated in hundreds of millions of dollars of economic benefit that you're gaining from it. Once you kind of do that math, there's no stress. And by the way, that is the math back to like the career. Like when we started doing this math when I was at BCG, you're like, this is the foundation of a new strategy. It's not a 2% incremental benefit. It's a profound change in the end customer. And that's what gives you the conviction to really bet a total company strategy like IBM's on that, because it's kind of a transformational value proposition, not an incremental one.
But it's very beautifully what you just said, but I think there's somewhere the debate around innovation versus standardization hasn't really happened. And I think there is merit in standardization, because innovation doesn't necessarily mean enterprise grade, secure, and stable, right? So I think this entire concept of stability and foreseeability, and on top of that, standardization, on top of that, you can build DevSecOps in a beautiful way. I think that debate really hasn't really taken off. And I think it'll be great for folks like IBM to sort of talk about flexibility, innovation versus standardization, stability, because I think there is merit in stabilization and standardization. Right?
And I'd say, I think history has taught us that standardization is not the opposite of innovation. If you look at every time a stack stabilizes, if it's the TCP/IP stack igniting kind of the internet, you go on and on.
Yeah.
When standards are chosen, then an ecosystem can really build around it. And heterogeneity, it creates a lot of creativity, but I want heterogeneity of the new use case, the new creative way to create a business from technology. We don't need heterogeneity of how to do containers. And so it's what is the creativity that creates value and innovation in the world? And one of the things where the standards are really converging, and you can take advantage of that standardization. So they're not at odds, but it's finding spots where you can meet in the middle in good ways. I think that's that. And I agree. Like I put that on myself personally and IBM overall. I think our advocacy and leadership on it is something to be done. I would say we just had, our Think conference, as you know. Right. We had Delta on stage, who's really kind of one of our lead adopters of the hybrid cloud strategy. They're running OpenShift on the mainframe. Yep. They're running OpenShift as the ROSA service in AWS. Yep. Moving a lot of applications to the cloud on top of ROSA. They're using our consulting services to help implement it. And they were on stage at our Think conference talking about that journey. It's accelerating innovation. It's lowering operating costs. And they talked about how it actually allowed them to be the first to offer free Wi-Fi in their planes.
I heard the session. It was beautiful.
Telco. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing on the storytelling, honestly, will be this is like the classic, innovation curve. Those early adopters coming out and saying, I'm ahead in my industry because I made this technical choice. Honestly, I think IBM could say it till we're blue in the face. It will be our client saying it and showing it in their bottom lines that will inspire the others to say, oh, and that journey started 3 years ago. So you are 3 years behind somebody who's got a technical advantage in your industry.
At minimum, 3 years at minimum, right? It was a beautiful session I saw, and I thought that it was hilarious at the same time, but his examples were really funny, right? So
no, he could be a late night talk show host.
Yeah, like, I know, right?
CIO, and just like he seems like just a great guy to. He was a great guy to have on stage. He made an IT story like come alive.
Yeah, I saw that. And those who haven't watched it, I really urge you to sort of go back and sort of probably it's on YouTube or IBM's website. You should look it up as well. But thank you for talking about Think. That was actually my next question, and I'll tell you where the peg was. There's a lot happening in generative AI, and I truly think while generative AI is IBM's one of hidden gems that IBM hasn't done justice to, because there's a lot of bad press that Watson caught, in the last 5 years or so, be it in terms of what happened with Watson Health or let's say a lack of customization to many industries. But it is still one of the stories that hasn't been told very well. And then in Think Forum, we see, of course, WatsonX being introduced. Now, even before we go a little deeper into what WatsonX is and how it benefits, etc., can you talk to me a little bit about how is generative AI redefining or evolving your hybrid cloud strategy in many ways?
Well, I think certainly our strategy, we've said from the beginning of Arvind's tenure, it's hybrid cloud and AI. And I think that and AI becomes much clearer in a WatsonX world. But I think, first of all, there's a bunch of things where, AI is really fundamental to our hybrid cloud strategy. First of all, just at the basic tech platform layer. So if you look at innovators like OpenAI, they're running their generative AI, they're training and running their generative AI on the same open source foundation, containers and Kubernetes, et cetera. So if you look at where this runs, it is the same technology stack. So if you think, again, another big use case where if you're going to do generative AI across environments, standardization and simplification is, again, a great value proposition. Then if you look at, you're right, we've been working on, so our research, we're very fortunate to have this phenomenal research team. And to your point, they do make part of their mission is to make long-ranging technology bets, which kind of take the risk away from IBM and take the risk away from our clients, right? Making sure that there's a path for the clients that work closely with IBM. And they've been bending my ear for years now on foundation models, generative AI, the transformer model. And so we've actually had, call it generative AI, but we've had foundation model-based technology inside IBM products for years now. And then obviously a lot of the WatsonX platform, that was coming no matter what, but the interest got accelerated dramatically by what OpenAI did with ChatGPT. So it's really kind of pulled forward a strategy around bringing foundation models to life, but it was something that we've been working on deeply. And, to some extent, it's a real positive for us that this is not us introducing some new complex technology. It's something clients are pulling. And then we'll dig deeper into WatsonX, but we think that we do have an answer for clients to adopt this technology in the right way with the right kind of data security, usability, governance, et cetera, that will be, to your point earlier, it will take this kind of current, the consumer technology and find its path to the enterprise in a way that the enterprise can adopt.
I think ChatGPT did you guys a huge favor. They sort of, made ChatGPT and generative AI is a term so wanted in boardroom that people have no option but to get folks like yourself in and say, I don't want ChatGPT because it's not secure, how they use my code, how they use my data, I don't know. So I want the more enterprise-grade, secure AI. So I think it sort of has opened doors. And, I have so many clients in these board meetings, they know nothing about technology, but they want to use ChatGPT. And I said, well, do you even know what ChatGPT is? What even does to your data? Well, they couldn't care less. So I think that way ChatGPT has done a lot of folks a lot of favor just by sort of making it a lot more in the news and in the chatter. That's sort of open doors, right? But I want to go a little deeper into WatsonX. For the sake of the audience, can you sort of help us with the broad contours of what WatsonX is, the three components, which is .ai, .data, .governance, what it's sort of each of these layers stand for, and sort of the value add each of these layers has, along with, let's say, cloud pack for data, etc., in let's say a hybrid cloud strategy.
Sure. So if I can, I might start with so my team, a big part of my day job now, like I said, we've been working with a research team on foundation models for years, but we spend a lot of time on foundation models in corporate strategy, as you can imagine, and really interrogating this combination of market opportunity and technical reality. And it is a very interesting technology, I think, unlike anything we've experienced in our careers, because it has these emergent properties. So there are things on a very linear curve with these foundation models. If you make them bigger, they'll do the original thing as you expected, but new properties emerge at kind of unexpected intervals. So it is one that we watch closely, this combination of market opportunity and technical possibility, because we're constantly amazed at new breakthroughs on the technology. But underneath our beliefs, I'd say, three core beliefs that really underpin what WatsonX has. First of all, we believe that, back to the hybrid strategy, we believe these foundation models will draw upon data and run across different environments. So it has to exist where your business needs it to do ultimately the AI inference to guide business decisions. Second of all, we're betting on the open community. So we've already seen, if you look at the Facebook or Meta Llama model and how that's been triggered, all these kind of small models that can get to, chat GPT like performance. We've seen the open source community innovate so much more quickly. And you probably saw the Moats article that came out of Google. I mean, I think they're really recognizing that if you say, hey, listen, there's a couple of major vendors and then there's the field, you got to bet on the field. And that's kind of been part of our open source strategy. So the flexibility to use, IBM will create models, but we'll also have the flexibility to use other models. And the third thing, which is really a learning back to like the Watson experience, where I think one of our strategic advantages is what we learned during the Watson experience. But the biggest thing is around trust and governance of these AI models, bias, drift detection, explainability, data provenance, having it be something that you actually can make core decisions in your business. I think what we'll find is heterogeneity of, we may have a bunch of use cases that can write the first draft of a press release. Phenomenal. But when it comes to running the core business or making a medical decision or the things that really have life or death or the core of the business on hand, you need to have a higher level of kind of governance and explainability. So those are the three big things we built WatsonX on. And then you kind of back up, what is WatsonX? You kind of got to it, but it is three areas. It is AI, which is effectively an AI studio for data scientists to anything from train to fine tune these AI models. We announced a partnership with Hugging Face, which is kind of a leading open source model marketplace. So they're plugged in. So really have the access to a wide range of models and putting them to work for the business. And a lot of the tools and workbenches that make it very easy to go from that model to applying to a use case in the business. WatsonX.data is, these go by many names, but it's effectively a lakehouse purpose-built for the needs of foundation models. So you can have these large data sets at hand to build this AI. And the last piece is WatsonX.governance, which is a lot of that explainability, drift, bias detection, governance, provenance, so that you can actually run this in the enterprise, both know that you're putting up well-governed models to begin with, and then watch to make sure they're not drifting or accumulating bias as they move along. And so that's the platform. And we've had an amazing number of signups for the early beta program coming out of Think. So I'm just super excited with the traction we've gotten from it, because I think a lot of people customers have looked at what are their core beliefs on AI, and they line up one-to-one with what I laid out. And I do think if that's the direction that you think AI will go in your business, WatsonX is going to be one of the answers for you.
Interesting. And there's a ton of confusion, right? There are companies who have already started and embarked on a certain AI journey. And the confusion I sort of hear from my client base is that, where do we start from? We understand, there's the .ai, there's .data, and then there's .governance. What's the right starting point? Or is there even a right starting point at all?
Well, first of all, I'd say, IBM and others are doing this, but, so we've got a set of products. If it's Watson Assistant for customer care, we got a lot of places where we already have foundation models built in. So I think there's, looking at how you leverage this technology, out of the box in the applications you may already have, or from vendors you can get at the application level. I think there's a whole range of individual product, the Sidekick or Copilot model, there's a whole range of those. I think the only asterisk on that is I think there's a pretty robust conversation going on right now on copyright around those.
Yep.
And if we trained it from a corpus of data, all of GitHub, does it mean that those that created the original code have some rights to royalties on what you could? So I think there are things to be worked out. But I think those will happen. But then we do see a whole range of use cases where if it's open source models, or if we often see mixed things. We're using a GPT or a Google model to build training data sets that then are applied to open source models that are, controlled and run behind the firewall or across different clouds. So I think we see a range of patterns occurring. And honestly, Sachin, I'll say that the patterns it'd be hard for anybody to say, we know the pattern of how this will land. A big part of my team on corporate strategy, we've begun, before we get to the analysts, we're just being the journalists. We're just cataloging use cases, patterns, stacks, why they chose that stack, and trying to, it gets a lot back to those core beliefs I began with. But, you know, we are far from coming to a converged point of view of the use cases and architecture core patterns, because it's just such an emergent space.
That's so true. That's very well said, because there's only so much you can predict at this time. I mean, like, who could ever say Hadoop was to be a standalone database data on its own, right? It was always a tech under Yahoo, right? So I think things evolve and things emerge. But look, we could sort of have a whole dedicated session on WatsonX, but I just have my last question for the moment, and I'll promise we'll do another one on WatsonX later. But one of the biggest problems CIOs and CTOs face is how do you really scale these models beyond a certain workload or a certain function and take it sort of across BUs, across functions? So scalability is a large problem statement in real day life of CIOs and CTOs. How sort of solving that?
Well, I think foundation models at their core do a lot to help solve that, because foundation models have this property that, obviously they're trained on a lot of data to begin with. They can be one base foundation model can be fine-tuned to do a number of different use cases across the enterprise. So I think first and foremost, in a kind of ML world where it was one data curation, labeling, training, deployment, lifecycle for each individual use case, the amount of work to scale those is much lower. And so that gets to like the human labor data scientist bottleneck of scaling. Again, I think a big piece of it too was, how do you operate, how do you run this in the enterprise at scale? And again, it gets back to that core platform. So if you look underneath it, containers and Kubernetes are part of how you do inference. And it's because that container, you could take the same algorithm and put it into a different environment, put the same data in and get a different answer out, right? Actually wrapping the environment in which an algorithm runs gives you repeatability in AI. So it gets back to why this same platform, and obviously Kubernetes can scale massively, right? It is a kind of cloud-based software layer. So we do think like that combination of the properties of foundation models along with a platform that can run it at scale is part of addressing that question. I think the other bottleneck remains, though, the choice making on which use cases, where, with what kind of risk, trust, and it gets all the way back to, am I accessing the data in the enterprise? Am I bringing that to work? So there's a lot of things that get back to the base kind of data curation, data management, data governance steps that a lot of our strategy is based upon. But we're working hard to solve that. And I'll say one other comment, you kind of got to it on the Hadoop statement. I think it's very obvious that these foundation models are going to play a quick role in a lot of things that have an efficiency value proposition. It is always foggier to foresee the effectiveness value proposition. How will this create new customer experiences, new business models, new sources of revenue, new paths of innovation? I think every team has to really have some sort of Shark Tank or experimental model that's really playing with that, because if you just settle for the efficiency, I can guarantee you're missing opportunity in the business. But the nature of the effectiveness value proposition will be different, maybe for every industry or practically for every company, given that they all compete uniquely. So I do think those CIOs are going to have to think about the scalability, the effectiveness value proposition, and it's going to be it's going to emerge. Like, we're going to all learn as this technology comes to life in so many companies over the next several years.
That's a great answer. I think the fact that a lot of them even don't know what to measure right now. The big problem is they're using a lot of these traditional metrics to sort of pull some data in and make some sense of it. And I think what do you even measure and what do you even call effectiveness is going to be a big part of the discussion here on. And I think that's where IBM Consulting will play a big role, I'm sure, right? So good. So look, we'll talk about WatsonX again, but in the interest of time, before we even speak about AWS, I want to first understand from you two things. One is your stand on the hyperscaler strategy, because I hear a ton of messaging coming out from IBM on AWS and very little on Azure and GCP. Now, what it sort of seems from the outside is that while there's a friendly relationship with Azure and GCP, it's not as thick as it probably is with the others, right? So if you could sort of, talk to me a little bit about broadly and not too much in detail, what's the sort of motions you're looking to drive with these different hyperscalers? And of course, we go deep into AWS, but what's the sort of motion with Azure and GCP?
I'll take it a little out of order if it's okay. So I place, AWS and Azure in very similar positions in terms of how we partner with them, the relative scale of our business and partnership. They have different natures. There's specific spaces that we collaborate more deeply on with each of them. And back to my background, I have a particular sweet spot on SaaS. We've done more with AWS, just they've leaned into us. But I think for so many clients, it is either AWS or Azure as the major for their cloud environment. So not partnering with them is just not a choice in a hybrid strategy. For GCP, we do have Red Hat running a managed service in GCP. I think there, because we're trying to just prioritize those first two that are larger, are really the focus area, but we do have that flexibility to run the Red Hat services on top of GCP as well. So I'd really put, as much as, I am the exec over the AWS relationship, it's kind of my favorite based on the business results, but also personal relationships.
Yeah.
I have to be fair and acknowledge that Azure is in a similar place.
Sure.
And then I get to that, where do we partner? I think AWS is an amazing case study of that. So we're partnering across our entire business with AWS. And so if you take our consulting business, implementing so many of these standards on top of AWS, and I'll just say as an example, inorganically, we've acquired consulting firms that are with AWS skills and with Azure skills. So we prioritize putting inorganic dollars to work on both of those. So that may be the strongest statement of strategic intent. But in our consulting business, we've scaled that from being nowhere 3 years ago to number 7 last year. I think it was number 2 or 3 most recently in their kind of rankings of consulting partners. So rapidly scaling that business jointly. And that's joint teams. And again, one of the joys of being at Think is a marker in our progress. And so every year when we get together, the AWS team comes out in force to Think as well, both connecting with them and just celebrating how much traction we've made over the year. I mean, it's the momentum on the consulting side continues to grow. Maybe the biggest marker is our software business. A year ago, Think 2022, we announced we would have SaaS on AWS, and making that big choice to say we will be hybrid multi-cloud and how we do SaaS, right? That flexibility we talked about earlier. Fast forward a year, we've got multiple products GA'd across multiple regions on top of AWS. We've got transactions happening through the AWS marketplace. We have our enterprise contracts working together. We've got our partner, they're on stage at our Partner Plus Day, which is our partner network, talking about how as a IBM reseller, you can transact through the AWS marketplace and still get paid, in the business model you want to as an IBM partner. So much more to come on SaaS for sure. I hope and intend and depend on more, but it is moving incredibly fast, and it's hard. It really does feel, it's hard to believe it really was just 1 year because of so much that we've done over the course of that year. And then also, even at the infrastructure layer, it's sometimes surprising. About a year ago, we really sat down with the AWS team around, in particular, the mainframe. They had a practice they used to call the mainframe migration practice. And we talked about the performance, stability, security characteristics of the mainframe. And they'd personally seen that, attempting mainframe migrations, I'm not defending every mainframe workload in the world, but like for the ones that are really the core transactional integrity of the business that run, Delta talked about on stage, or if you're a bank or an exchange, a migration to a distributed architecture, like literally to, go tech out for a second, like the speed of light becomes a constraint on how fast you can transact. It just doesn't, it's a purpose-built architecture. So a year later, we're working jointly on mainframe modernization. How do you bring innovation back to the mainframe, pick off services, data sets, use cases, move those to the cloud and do that jointly. And so I hosted a joint breakfast with clients with one of the AWS leaders that runs their container infrastructure to talk about joint mainframe modernization patterns. So you talk about like a partnership clicking, and that's in addition to field collaboration, ecosystem collaboration. You see like a partnership kind of covering the whole business. I think the hyperscalers are just a really unique service. And then also Deepak Singh was the name, the exec that runs container services. And he's very transparent about it. The ROSA service, the Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS, he does reviews with that Red Hat team the same as it was one of his other AWS services. So like he gives them the same pressure, intensity, measurement, management that he gives one of his own. That's maybe the highest form of partnership, like really in the family. So I just, I expect, I think we have much more to do together, and we do have plans for what will come at reInvent and what will come for 2024. But I couldn't be happier with the progress we've made to date. And to your point before, it's from a world in which this partnership would have been unthinkable a few years ago.
That's true. It reminds me of the partnership IBM's enjoyed with SAP. 50 long years, engineers sit next to each other, code develop. And I think that's sort of AWS relationship of IBM is it reminds me of the SAP relationship with IBM, which is the longest in the making, right? But I tell you what, I'll move on to my SaaS question very quickly, but I do want to make a point here. Here's that a lot of our clients talk about these days is enterprise IT and innovation IT. And typically for them, enterprise IT stems from Azure. And the reason is that because all their investments into identity and cybersecurity are beginning from that environment, and all the endpoints are being governed and managed in the Azure environment. So that sort of becomes a mainstay for a lot of these clients. And that's the only reason I even asked that why probably not an equally important motion with Azure as compared to AWS. And that's where I was coming from.
Got it.
Okay. You've spoken about SaaS, and it personally fascinates me the journey that IBM's been making, going from the traditional software, the start of IP, right, with an IBM, which is more organic and acquired. But as you sort of start putting your SaaS on marketplaces, there ought to be, let's say, a recall that people have, let's say that they have for QRadar, or let's say they have for Db2. But a lot of these software assets within IBM necessarily do not have a branding of its own. Now, in the past, it's been very intentional because you sort of didn't want to confuse the world with lots of brands. But that was changed, right, as you move to the marketplace, because the individual brands of what a software stands for is why they get downloaded and sort of sold, right? How will that change within the new IBM selling model in the marketplaces of the AWS?
So, I think the industry term is product-led growth on a lot of these. And so we've lived in this kind of, marketing challenge of marketing this big portfolio that you described. And it kind of became like all or nothing. It was total IBM or all the way down to the individual piece parts, and a lot got lost in the middle. What we've declared, and we talked a lot about this at Think, is there's a set of kind of strategic products, mainly in the software space as a service, that we think clients should start with. If it's existing customers or if it's new ones as well. And we've got a real mandate that we talk about externally around acquiring new customers, because to be a growth technology company, you have to bring new customers who have to want to join you. And so we're really embracing this, digital-led, product-led growth as a service, go-to-market motion that so many other pioneers for years in the as-a-service space have adopted. And we're being really intentional about a handful of products. To your point, some are acquired, some are ones that have been part of IBM for a long time. But having a discrete, there's 15 products that really are the priority for PLG. And for those, you'll see a lot of digital product marketing, a lot of direct kind of digital engagement, sales engagement, et cetera, and prioritization in those marketplaces to drive. And we'll still be available a number of products, but you simply can't be everything to everyone. So we try to be intentional about the ones that are the best place to get started with IBM, and really kind of make sure that the market hears that message.
Right, got it, understood. Now, within the AWS, wireframe and the relationship, I saw about there were 12 pillars where your software was available, right? From security, data and AI, sustainability, storage. There's a lot going on there, right?
Mhm.
Can you give me a sense of the key pillars of these, which way we're looking to sort of, let's say, go deeper in terms of software capability on the marketplace, or let's say go a little more horizontal in terms of availability? One is that. And more importantly, the feedback cycle coming in from developers and users of AWS. How are you sort of mapping the feedback from the users of AWS directly to the product teams of IBM? Because that's an important relationship to have, and the trajectory sort of gets formed thereon, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say I won't go through all of it, I think,
Sure.
but there were kind of 7 or so areas that we really talked about as the priorities for IBM software.
Sure.
So a couple of them are these layers, right? The Red Hat layer is kind of the DevOps application platform spanning environments. The second is the data layer, which really WatsonX represents, but it brings together a lot that we'd had in Data Fabric and Cloud Pak for Data traditionally. And I think actually that's a really important recognition to really treat that as a layer. Because like we said, when you start doing AI, you run into these data heterogeneity, data integration, data governance problems. So it really is another kind of spanning layer. And then on top of that is a set of capabilities. It's security, sustainability, digital labor, IT automation, application modernization. So it's a set of capabilities that live on top of that. And so that's really where we're prioritizing. Hopefully it'd be less than what you saw with 12, but those are the focus areas. And within each of those, there is kind of a leader or 2 products in each of those spaces that we really want to drive through the marketplaces. Those are the PLG products that I described before. So you'll see that as a prioritization. And I think that kind of articulation helps clients understand a bit more about what IBM software really stands for.
Mm-hmm.
Because, on some of the businesses we've exited and things like that earlier, we're much more concentrated on like solving those, if it's digital labor and automation, or if it's IT automation, or if it's application, really solving kind of the digital transformation use cases of the enterprise. Mm-hmm. And we're much more focused business on making that happen now.
Interesting. And when you sort of make these available on the marketplace, I'm really sort of intrigued. IBM as a company traditionally, and the sellers really haven't dealt with marketplace sales, right?
Yeah.
It's a different motion, it's a different mindset. Even for the customers, the kind of customers that you have, not everybody has an engineering mindset, right? So they sort of need a lot more enabled access to the marketplace, where someone really physically, one of your team members really physically goes and sort of helps with an implementation via the marketplace. How are you sort of changing the teams to be able to enable sales via the marketplace?
A couple thoughts. We've had a lot of conversations at Think with the AWS team. I think that gearbox of really seeing, digital interest, trials occurring via the marketplace of kind of an end user, and how do we make sure that that connects into the follow-up engagement, customer success from IBM. That is something that we're driving, but that gearbox is taking shape, and it's tuned slightly product by product because the signals of interest are different. I think the other thing to say is the marketplace is also how AWS transacts and manages its enterprise contracts, its EDP.
Right.
So sometimes it's the way that you track. So they have, it's a phenomenal thing for our sellers that, get into it. Contract, there's so many of these large committed spend contracts that, frankly, a lot of clients don't know how they're going to use what they've committed.
That's true.
And so our sellers are paid, AWS pays our sellers dollar for dollar on IBM software through that EDP. So what you really find is they can actually sell into this enterprise contract, and it's really a win-win. The client gets the value of the IBM technology. They do it against a spend commitment that they've already laid out. Our sellers can, IBM grows and our sellers can retire their quota without having the client having to write a new check. So it's really a great setup, and it's part of the partnership, because AWS does not want to get to the end of those EDP terms and find out that clients have unused commitments, because that obviously has a negative drag on their business as well. So
that's true.
We want both, right? We want that digital innovation, new customer trials, that motion to thrive. But I think kind of and that will be, digital sales, inside sales, ecosystem. The traditional kind of IBM big account is much more that EDP and how do we help jointly kind of burn down that EDP with the client and with AWS.
Got it. And there are these IBM house accounts, and then there are these AWS first accounts, right? And how would you sort of ensure that the let's say if you have a certain criteria of passing on discounts on a certain licensing deal, how do you sort of ensure that sort of gets translated into the marketplace, into the contract, which is sort of taken out of the AWS commitment in terms of money? One is that. And second of all, how do you sort of ensure that if there are areas where AWS has a competing product, it doesn't sort of get involved in the sales motion at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take them slightly out of order. I think, our head of consulting, John Granger, uses a term, dance with the one who brought you, which is, when you, I'm not sure if it plays globally, but if you're going to like a dance, if you have a date, you stick with them.
Yeah, I know.
It's part of loyalty. So in general, we run into very few things where there's an open RFP and it's head-to-head of IBM technology and AWS technology. Most often it is a client has expressed an interest in the IBM technology running on AWS. And because we kind of both, in the spirit of partnership, kind of respect that dance with the one who brought you, we're not trying to make it harder on ourselves by introducing that new technology. And then frankly, for an AWS seller, they're paid 100% on the IBM technology as well that's running as a service. We've really made it equal, so we don't compete with each other. And I'm really letting that client decide on what is the better technology choice for them. And then back to, how do you collaborate on these? First of all, we'll honor the commitments from an EDP and an IBM ELA. We are frankly working through a lot of the details of how you gearbox those together even better. So that becomes more of a repeatable motion.
That's right.
But it's not, the client doesn't have to go through anything where they have to renegotiate. They're not gonna, it doesn't create more work on their side. The work is kind of, much more on our side right now, and we want to automate a lot of that. But then you get to the base of it, honestly, has been the kind of spirit of collaboration and trust. Like to some extent, once these teams realize, back to that starting point we got to, which is we're helping our clients achieve big ambitions inside their businesses with technology. When our joint account teams sit together and recognize this is the journey that our client wants to go on, fighting over this technology or that technology in the context of a massive opportunity, and where we're jointly creating so much value for the end client, it tends that trust is built and we're both succeeding together. So honestly, we still see little things where that relationship has not been built yet, but for the account teams that know each other and kind of operate side by side, like I hear very little noise, coming out. And if it's any noise, it is the teams that have not yet met each other to kind of figure out the right collaboration.
Understood. And of course, I'm assuming sort of you have flexibility on bring your own license to AWS, right? Is that a big part of the motion from your customers?
It is now. As we have, I do think as a service is, has a real value proposition for customers in terms of not just making the technology available, but taking a lot of the management obligations out of the way for the client, so they don't have to be in the business of managing IBM technology. And so, which we should be better at that and would do it at scale. So I think as you see, we'll continue to have BYOL, but I think as a mixed statement, I think we'll see a lot more companies choosing the as a service option.
Yeah,
as it becomes as more products GA and it becomes more available kind of in more AWS regions around the world.
Yeah, because I was reviewing a few contracts that have gone out from your end and AWS, and there is the eligible public cloud BYOSL policy, but there is a lot of limitations in terms of what licenses can you move. Is it an MSP? Is it a web hosting? Is it a SO contract? There's a lot of these contours, and I think going net new as a service is going to be a lot easier compared to sort of going traditional licensing all in, right? It's just a lot more complex as a conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is certainly, SaaS is a very big strategic element of where we're headed. And that metaphor you just described of just those individual contracts is true across as a service. And I think that's one of the big learnings is
That's true.
if it's contracting, if it's operations, if it's security, you take a lot of this bespoke stuff that is unique to each offering, you run it as a service vendor, and you just simplify your end customer's life. And you're talking about the father of SaaS. I can't claim that. It's Mark Benioff is probably best place to have it. But I think that is it's a great technology delivered where you need it, but abstracting away a lot of that complexity is kind of the value prop. And we're delivering that. And I think it's really great to be delivering it with AWS, Azure, and our cloud partners.
Excellent. I see, I've noticed a trajectory. Most of your GA first happens of course, in AWS US instances. It doesn't really necessarily, isn't really tested and tried for all the regions. And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. Fintech in Asia is really bursting out loud right now. And the use cases are very different. The kind of scale that you see for fintech in Asia are very different compared to the US, right? Now, what is the do you have a dedicated strategy or a plan to come up with products, let's say, which do better for, let's say, scale in countries like Asia, regions like Asia? And what's the overall ensuring global GA and not just US instance only?
We have, it's a fair point. We have internally, and we do share it with some clients. We have a very clear roadmap of which products, where, and there's a drumbeat of releasing them. We've done a lot to simplify our platform to deliver across AWS, IBM Cloud, Azure, et cetera, so that we're taking out the kind of incremental energy for each one of those deployments. So the rate and pace of that is accelerating as we kind of take out a little bit of our own internal friction, but we are very clear on a very steady rollout of that globally. And then I'd say, AWS is collaborating with us. There's a lot of, I'm sure you're aware, transacting in local currencies, transacting in the way that local businesses want to consume. We're on a joint journey to help them collaborate with us and learn with us. We're doing a lot to leverage our ecosystem as well, because there's so much of the ecosystem that is part of how you serve different countries around the world. So it's not just IBM work to do this. It's a two-way street of how we collaborate to better serve the global market. But we will get there, and we're very methodical and clear to our teams about what products, where, when. And I'm pretty proud that we have, AWS is very transparent with us. Again, back to a year in, they've been wowed by just once you get IBM going on something, just moving, hitting the milestone after milestone after milestone. So, there's always technical uncertainty, but I'm pretty confident that roadmap. I encourage any team, any client that is interested in a particular service in a particular region to ask your sales teams, and they can kind of give you that sense. And then obviously the BYOL option you described before is always available.
Right.
And so everything we just talked about is the as a service availability. And that is coming. So we have a global plan across the portfolio of offerings, and your IBM sales teams can go to the specifics if you want this product in this region. That can kind of give you the when on that.
Okay, interesting. It's just that I do make a point here is that the AWS enterprise team tends to be a little bit patchy, if I may. There are regions where they play very, very strongly. In the other regions, the enterprise team is slightly weak, not doing as wonderfully as they would as their US counterparts. And I think that's something to consider as you go deeper with AWS, as to probably a bit of more push from the IBM sellers could help increase that pace of journey.
I think, gosh, for decades now, I think the IBM, more than any other US-based tech company, has lived the international business missions. I think so many, when I go to a different country, clients are aware that IBM is a US headquartered company. Well, I think we serve the markets we serve those international markets in a way that's very different than a lot of our Western competitors. And so I think that is part of why an AWS partners with us, is recognizing the maturity of that in-country model that we've established in so many places around the world, where that IBM brand is like, going to Japan, right? I think IBM is like almost treated like a Japanese company in some way, as an example. Yeah. And I mean, everybody knows it is a US, but we've been there so long. So I think working with AWS and other of our partners that are US based, kind of newer companies that haven't really worked out how to serve, pick your market. I think that's part of our value prop as a partner, is that, they may do really well in the US, may do really well in Western Europe, but many of them like really serve, I think, use the term patchy. They are a lot of Western SaaS companies are pretty patchy on how they serve the rest of the world.
Good. We are on the same page then. See that.
By the way, another hybrid multi-cloud statement too. I mean, as you know, like Asia Pacific is so geographically diverse and broad, like the latency matters, right? You may have, if you're going to start trying to serve Australia from a US data center or a Europe data center,
forget about it.
It's you're going to create some problems. So I do think it's that global nature of both global vendors but global companies is another just kind of case point for why hybrid multi-cloud is a future direction.
Yeah, makes sense. I really want to sort of pick your brains on a few more topics, if I may, please.
Sure.
The SAP install base and the VMware install base have been two very large revenue drivers for IBM, right? And I really want to understand the relationship of, let's say, the trio of you, IBM, SAP, and AWS. Because I know for a fact that, I remember doing some consulting back in 2010 and 11, and where Db2 was a choice of database for all SAP ECC environments, right? And we talk about Db2 separately, but how has been the journey to sort of take S4HANA along with IBM consulting and on AWS with, of course, the underlying platform being Red Hat and other things from IBM? What's been the success on that?
I'd say a few things. If I could just dial back for the SAP partnership overall, I mean, you're right in that it is kind of the longest and strongest partnership we've had, almost from, there are a lot of ex-IBMers that were part of the founding team at SAP, and almost like back to the first, existence of SAP. It was a deep collaboration that's continued. I think we talked about it, I think, but it was announced the week before. I think maybe the biggest example of partnership is what we announced on AI, where SAP is going to be adopting Watson inside SAP. And you think about the use case on that for a second, it is kind of a search interface or a text interface to get things done in SAP. You think of how much, and I think this is a metaphor for back to your questions on foundation model use cases, et cetera. So much of our time each day is spent getting a interface to do what we want. I have to go, I know to click here, then go 5 deep, and then go left and then down again in order to get this piece of information I want. And elevating that so you can just in natural language ask that question and get that report or get that answer is just, I think it's going to be a profound shift. And I think SAP adopting it and just recognizing, obviously SAP is an incredibly successful and capable technology company, but recognizing that AI is just incredibly difficult. We have learned that during the Watson experience. And I think them recognizing that SAP is going to be hybrid multi-cloud and they need an AI partner that is going to be there as well. It's just, you think about WatsonX, I'm almost equally excited with the SAP announcement because I don't, SAP is a very rigorous engineering culture.
That's true.
So if SAP is selecting IBM as their hybrid multi-cloud AI, I struggle with what company would be a better testimonial of the capability that we have there. So I just think that's tremendously exciting. I will say, again, the cloud choice, we have implemented, SAP, if it's IBM Cloud, AWS, Azure. Obviously, the march toward SAP on cloud is inextricable. It is difficult. And so our team has built those skills. I think when I talk with the AWS team, I think everybody wants to see more of that workload running on their cloud. And so they want to deepen, it's part of why they want to deepen the partnership with SAP and IBM Consulting to make sure that the client understands the value proposition of that. Again, I go back a little bit to the dance with the one who brought you. Often it is I personally have seen, this isn't a scientific study, a lot of that choice tends to be driven by a lot of the other cloud decisions I've made in my enterprise. And I think SAP's done a good job of being flexible to run across those environments so that, for that client, like you said before, that they've bet on Azure across their enterprise, they're probably going to do SAP there. Flip if they've done it with AWS or IBM Cloud. So I think, again, as the AWS kind of relationship executive, I'd love to see more of that run on AWS, but I think the real answer is that it goes back to where does the client want their workload to run, because it has the most complementarity to the other processes and data repositories and analytics they want to do. So it tends to be the customer that drives that choice. And with IBM Consulting and all the different partnerships we've built, always, whatever the client says, I want to run SAP there, our consulting team can say, we can do that for you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When the SAP announcement came out with the IBM Watson, I actually wrote a large note on LinkedIn because I was pretty excited, because these are installations I've been a part of very closely, and I think that the fact that you can consume Watson on SAP over AWS using that NLP at scale on an AWS cloud multi-instance distributed architecture, I think that's going to be where you sort of make most of your SAP investments. The biggest issue with SAP has been the ROI on those investments, has been poor use of those reports and data, right? And I think that's where WatsonX.data can sort of do a lot, just to simplify, to understand those reports, make them more usable, and at scale at different functions. I think going from, anyway, it's a long topic.
Sanchit, I totally agree. I think it's even, like, there's one aspect of making the report better. I think it's just, sometimes it's just making somebody aware that report is there. I really do think there's an expert user knows, sometimes it's dozens of clicks to kind of get what you want. And it's not SAP, it's any one of these big enterprise applications that we run our businesses on. If every adopter in your company starts from the starting point that your expert users have, the ROI you get out of that platform is amplified so much. So I think it's an incredible accelerant, and you can and should expect it from other big software vendors that are looking, we're working with to kind of deliver that technology as well, because we do think that kind of AI as part of almost the interface to productivity software is a big piece of the future. And we think, obviously I think Microsoft will do it with OpenAI. There'll be those that do it with their own. But for most vendors, that massive investment, like back to this research team that's been working on this for years and has a decade plus in AI, and like, you can't be a SaaS vendor and replicate that. You got to find a partner that can deliver it for you. And if you're delivering it, if you think you're going to deliver across multiple clouds, or you think you want to deliver behind the firewall, there's kind of only one place to spend your time.
That's so true. I really also want to, since we just spoke about Db2, and again, it's a topic which is very close to my heart. I saw Db2 fall from, if I may excuse my observation here, but it sort of fell from grace in many ways. It became like a parentless child, because it was the database of choice for all SAP, and then came the crowd in the market. There's a lot happened in the database space, right? How would you sort of use the AWS relationship to get the mojo back on Db2, because it is still an extremely enterprise-grade, secure, scalable database of choice?
Again, I think first of all, we have a lot of clients that are using it and continue to use it. We're using it in a lot of our portfolio. If you look at the underpinning, data repositories for our as a service portfolio. So it continues to be, one of the databases we use. Certainly, if you look at it on top of the mainframe in particular, I think it is hands down the highest performing relational database, kind of with not much of a peer. So it's a priority. I do think there's a question in terms of, you know, the use cases that really need that performance and capability,
Right.
versus the, you know, the ones who kind of, the relational database is kind of a just rows and columns that I can query occasionally. And so I think there's been obviously a lot of competition on that high performance database from, you know, Oracle, SAP HANA, et cetera. And then there's also been a commoditization of kind of the open source community delivers a lot of really great capability for a lot of data. I was selling it short on just rows and columns. I think the open source community has delivered a lot. So I don't think that DB2 has lost any of its capability. I think it just exists in a world in which that relational database capability is just a super competitive space with, you know, the traditional competitors that we've worked with and against for so many years. But, you know, a lot of commoditization. And then, you know, I think for each of the hyperscale clouds as well, there's both a kind of a commodity version and, you know, some of these innovative versions that are, you know, big data, you know, whatever it is, billions of rows, kind of relational DBs, which really taking care of cloud power. So I don't think DB2, I think DB2 is still a healthy, high performance portfolio, but it just exists in a world in which there's a ton of different, I think it's, you know, really fit for purpose database where I think if you look behind it, I could pitch DB2 against Oracle, or I'm sure they could do the opposite. But I think if you look at it, there's a lot of logic of clients that have 8 or 10 different relational databases that they're running on, because they're actually fit for purpose for the performance and cost and scalability characteristics of the workload they're serving. And I just think, again, it's almost a hybrid statement at the data layer that, you know, this is almost universal. You see so many different data repositories, and I just talk to clients all the time that talk about literally thousands of different data repositories across the enterprise. I love for DB2 to have more of that share, but I also want to be recognized that like that fragmentation is still a reality in so many places.
Very busy market, and that's a fair comment, and I would sort of agree with you there. So look, let's change gears. We have to sort of come. We can speak, I think, for another hour or so, but we have to come to closing at some stage. So, before we close, I'd love to sort of see the one of the largest parts of IBM is IBM Consulting. It is a huge growth engine. For some of us who've been tracking IBM for a while, it's still GTS and GBS, and sort of, you know, for us, it's sort of, we keep going back to that. But how sort of are you intertwining the IBM consulting team into the AWS relationship? And more importantly, not all AWS customers will have the budget to hire an expensive IBM consulting. So how are you sort of making a lot more lean and affordable and relevant in that way?
Yeah. Yeah, I make a couple. We talked about it first a bit on ecosystems. If you look at IBM Consulting, we've really made this pivot to be much more ecosystem centric. So if it's AWS, Azure, if it's SAP, if it's Salesforce, working with these big vendors that in a hybrid environment, they're part of the innovation partners that deliver either, you know, the hyperscale cloud where you run, or so much of your sales processes or your marketing processes running on a Salesforce. So you see that overall as a strategic thrust of our consulting business. We've changed pretty dramatically, right? The GTS business most of that has been spun out and become Kyndryl. And I think that takes a lot of the inherent conflict we had both with consulting and then with the rest of IBM. So I think it becomes this business that is much clearer on being that, you know, our consulting business is that innovation partner for the things that really shape differentiation for the enterprise. And then, you know, to the point on price point, I mean, I will say we're doing a lot in our business if it's applying foundation models to kind of streamline what we can do. But in general, when we talk to clients, and I've been close to a number of them, they're often selecting IBM, even if it's like a little bit more pricey, because we're the partner that has that combination of kind of understanding the business, the industry, the context in which you compete, understanding the ecosystem partners, deep capabilities in the ecosystem partners that you're betting upon, and the execution chops to actually get it done with a minimum of risk and on time, et cetera. So I think there's a set of things where there's a lower cost vendor, but I do think where it's truly that kind of joint innovation partner to reshape the future of the business. I think, you know, IBM Consulting is a partner to bet on. And I think there's very few that are in that capability. I think you see a kind of a stratification of the market where, you know, we're being chosen for that like core of the business transformation, and others might be charged, you know, for the thing that's like lower risk but also lower value. They may select another, but I do think, at least from the work I do, I definitely see this stratification where IBM's rising to the top in that space, and the peers they're against there are high price as well, higher, I think.
So, no, I think consulting does a great job, especially on things like Rosa, because I've seen them personally in many deals, and they're absolutely fantastic, hands down. But it was just a general question. The CIOs.
Hey, Sachin, I think actually it's a really important point just to mention for a second, since you mentioned Rosa. I mean, then there's a question of why does IBM Consulting, how is it strategic to IBM? And while Kyndryl was spun out, you know, it is, first of all, that Red Hat practice, where they have the biggest Red Hat practice in the world by, you know, quite a margin. And it is based not just to sell the Red Hat stuff, it's because they fundamentally believe in the hybrid cloud value proposition as well. And so they believe it. Honestly, there were teams that were doing it on other container platforms. Red Hat's kind of taken such a leadership. Now it's really about Red Hat. So it's it differentiates our business, but also drives that Red Hat strategy as well. And now you're going to start to see it on WatsonX also, since we, back to those core beliefs, we believe this is the right way to do AI for the enterprise, to both get the value, but get the governance and kind of reliability. It'll be a similar playbook to kind of scale up that practice and lean into that market and have this kind of really strategic linkage between our consulting team and what we're trying to do with WatsonX and AI for the enterprise, and bring that to life. So, consulting is, I think, has demonstrated themselves as a technology partner for the enterprise, but they're, highly strategic on, it was Red Hat. If Red Hat was the hybrid and now WatsonX is the AI, now really clearly being strategic to the hybrid cloud and AI strategy for IBM.
It's a great answer. Thank you. So, we have at best 3-4 minutes to go, and I want to sort of ask you in very quick succession 2 questions. If you were to summarize IBM-AWS relationship in a few lines and say, why should the customers be excited? Why should the CIOs be excited?
I think it's simply because hybrid cloud is here to stay. A hybrid cloud platform is the best way to do innovation in the hybrid cloud. And so often when you say the word hybrid cloud, the cloud is AWS. Bringing that partnership together is just so natural. And it is where I think most of our clients are going to be doing, just if you look at the statistics, it's where most of our clients are doing their hybrid cloud innovation.
Makes sense. And last question, where does this relationship go from here on? What can clients expect?
I think you can expect us to continue. The vectors will continue. You're going to, at the consulting level, be more skills, more practices, more locations, more capabilities. At the software level, it's going to be more SaaS offerings in more locations around the world. And back to your point, even better connected to the ecosystem and the marketplace, et cetera. So, purchasing in the way you expect to purchase. And at the infrastructure level, I think you're going to continue to see more of these proof points of mainframe modernization jointly with AWS, helping clients maximize the value of their joint cloud and mainframe investment. So all of that, I really sincerely expect to continue. And I expect that curve to be, continue to be exponential, not linear.
Wonderful. Roger, this has been a wonderful conversation. It's been quite a marathon. And I know you're a marathon runner, so that was an intentional plug. So, it's been quite a marathon of a conversation. Thank you very much for your time. I have to tell you, this has been the most exciting conversation. Your passion for the AWS relationship is palpable miles away, let me assure you.
Excellent. Happy to do it, Sachin, anytime.
Thank you. Dear viewers, thank you for making time to see this very exciting video. If you have any hard questions, do send them over and I'll get Roger to answer them for you. And thank you once again for taking the time out to hear Greyhound TV ONTrigger.